going on? Acidic Loop back again, and we're going to do another video here on how I use the Akai Force for looping. So in the past, I've always used an iPad for years and years and years for all of my looping, and I've recently moved over to the Akai Force because I really kind of like the workflow of it. I like the single workstation where it has all the inputs and outputs and has all the instruments and everything you need all in one box. I really dig that workflow. And plus, it works good out in the hot Texas weather, unlike an iPad, which locks up due to heat. So you have to put a lot of coolant on it. So in general, I really like the Akai Force and how it works. So I've moved over to the Akai Force as my main looping, but I still use the iPad for some different things. And I also have developed over the years, I've developed a lot of different cool synths and keyboard sounds that I really dig. And what I would like to do is put them into the Akai Force. Now, I generally use plugins. I just prefer those over key groups, and sometimes they're a little bit better performance for me as far as like the memory usage and stuff. But there are times where there's some pretty cool sounds that I dig that I have on my iPad that I don't have like in a plugin or anything. So I would make something called a key group. So if you're new to the Akai Force, you have a couple different ways where you can do musical instrumentation on it. One is you can do the plugins that they have, so you can buy plugins or use the ones that are built in, like the hype synth and stuff, to play keys and bass and all that stuff. Or you can make something called a key group. And key group is just a sampled sound. And some people would say, well, do I just sample one? Like, do I just hit a key, like maybe a C2 of an instrument, sample that and bring it in? You can do that, and the Akai Force can spread it across all the note ranges and do it effectively. However, do keep in mind that if you have an instrument like an organ, let's say, that has a little bit of modulation to it, it's going to be problematic if you just use one sample, because as it keeps going up in pitch, it's also going to speed up the sample. It's going to speed up the modulation, and you don't really want that. You want the same modulation throughout the entire key range. So to do that, you want to sample at different intervals, like maybe a 4-note, 3-note spread, something like that. And some people go crazy and they just sample every single note of the entire keyboard range. I don't really need to do that, but generally the general rule that I follow is I listen to whatever the instrument is that I want to sample, and then I test out what key range I will likely be playing. So for instance, if I'm going to do a bass today, and I know that this bass, just from playing around with it, in the C2 to C4 range is typically where I'm going to play this bass. I'm not going to go really below C2. I'm not really going to go above C4. Knowing that information is helpful for doing the auto sampling. What I'll do is I'll actually sample. For instance, I'll do like C2, and then I'll do a D sharp 2, and then I'll do an F sharp 2, and then an A2. And then I'll do a C3, D sharp 3, so on and so forth. So I'll do 4 notes in that range, if you will. And that will give me a pretty good sampling at different note ranges that will sound pretty good and still keep any type of modulation that's needed, not in this case because it's using a bass. But if I was doing an organ, same scenario, okay? So the idea is to use the sampler. Now for me, I'm just saying I've had problems with this, making a key group from samples. For example, if I were to just go to the sampler and just record in a sample, in other words, what I've got here is I've got 2 1/4 inches for the inputs, and I got it going here to my actual iPad right there as a single one right there. So I could essentially, and I've done this, I could just record me playing each note, C2, D sharp 2, F sharp 2, A, so on and so forth, and record it in the sampler as one sample, chop it up, and then make a key group with 9 key groups and start dropping the samples in for each one, and then set them accordingly. The issue I'm running across, and I'll probably make a video about this because I really would like an answer to it because I really can't figure it out. I've asked it on multiple forums and haven't really got an answer for this. But every time I do this, every time I do this, I have to tweak the sample with the semi pitch tuning, because even if I have a C2 sound and I set it as C2 to D2 in the key group, it still always plays a full octave below it. And I don't know why that is, and it's annoying, and it takes too much time. So I'm going to say screw all that, and we're going to do auto sampling. But the issue I have with auto sampling is I've had some problems with physical MIDI where I've connected physical MIDI in to a USB MIDI and it didn't work properly. It would lag a lot, and halfway in the Autosampler it would cut out and disconnect. And then I tried it with another physical MIDI to MIDI instead of the Bluetooth, instead of the USB one. I did it for a full MIDI to another MIDI using an audio interface, and I had the same problem. Then I went ahead and did Bluetooth MIDI with my iPad Pro 12, and that cut out halfway in as well, and it disconnected the Bluetooth MIDI right in the middle of it more than once. I'd say probably 60 to 70% of the time. But I seem to actually be having a little bit better success with the iPad Air. I don't know why. It's only disconnected a couple times, so I'm not sure if it's going to disconnect during this one, but we'll see what happens. But I'm going to go with Bluetooth MIDI, even though, you know, it's probably not the best. But the premise of it is you want the MIDI information to be sent, because if you're sampling an instrument that has velocity layers, you want it to be able to go ahead and sample all of those velocity layers and do the actual sensitivity touch to it, if you will. And also, when you do the auto sample, it's just going to take over and do everything for you automatically. So you need to give it MIDI information. So that being said, let's go ahead and get into what I would do for this. So you already see here, I've got in the back, I've got it connected to the audio, because you still need to be able to have audio come in through it. So you can see I've got it connected there. And then what I've done here is, if you go here to Preferences and Bluetooth, you can see right there I've got my Bluetooth on. And then over here on my iPad, bring it up on the screen here, you can see that it disconnected. No, it is actually, I'm sorry, it's connected. So you can see right there it's connected as the Force. Okay, so we're good to go. I've got my connection between the Force and the Akai Force. What I'll be using today is an app called Chameleon, which is a really cool sampler. And it's got a cool bass sound that I've got. It's called Dark FM. But what you also want to check here is right down there, is you want to tap that, and you can make sure that it's connected. You can see right there, it says Force Bluetooth connected. Okay, and again, most apps will have something similar to this, but today I'm just using the Chameleon for this. Okay, all right, so I've got that good to go. And what I'm going to be doing, like I said, is going to be doing the C2. Oh, go back over here. Is going to be doing the C2 all the way to the C4, just because I dig it. You know, I think that's going to sound really good for it. All right, so I've got that set up. We're good to go. Next, what you're going to want to do is you want to come here to your matrix, and you're going to want to make a MIDI. So let me go ahead and get rid of the one I have here so I can show you how to do this from scratch for those that are new. So right there is a plus. You got the plus, and you're going to go from MIDI right there. And then you're going to double tap it. And right here where it has the MIDI out right there, I've selected it. You want to go ahead and pick whatever your MIDI is. In this case, I believe it's the second one. I don't know why I show two of them here, but you can see here it's Raymond's iPad, Bluetooth right there. So yours will be different, obviously, if you're using a different MIDI, or if you're using USB MIDI, it will probably say that. So I've got my MIDI channel set up, and we're ready to rock and roll. So let's go to the menu. Next, we're going to go to Sampler, which is right over here. And then right here, I've got this turned on. By default, it's turned off. So I'm going to turn it on. And that's going to allow me to monitor anything coming in. Now, because I have both 1 and 2 set here, or plugged in, then I want to make sure my inputs are 1 and 2. And then for mono, I'm going to set it to mono because I'm doing a bass. Typically, when you're doing sampling, you can do stereo, but you'll have uneven wavelengths between both of them, kind of. Well, not crazy amounts, but it's a little bit easier to work with a mono sample when it comes to things like bass. Now, if you do want a sample that has a lot of cool pan information already built into it and baked in, then you can do stereo, and that's fine. But for my purposes, I'm going to do mono. And you can also, and I'm not going to do this, but you can also add an insert effect, which is really cool, and it will affect whatever the sample is. It's pretty awesome. All right, so now that's all hooked in. So let's go over here to note mode. And now I should be able to hear my bass. Now, granted, there's a little bit of a lag because it is Bluetooth MIDI. There you go. And I got to make sure. Okay, it's on scales. Cool. All right, so now I know I have sound coming in, and I know everything's hooked up the way I want it to. right over here is a threshold meter. I've got that set to infinity, which is all the way to the bottom, which means as soon as a note hits, it's going to just start recording it. Now, normally in a sampler, if I just hit arm and then I hit record, because I have it set this way, it's not going to wait for a note to play before it starts recording. It's just going to start recording. But you can move the slider up and down, and you can see right here the different sounds. Now, notice how low that is right there, okay? Now, it's preferred that you actually increase the sound first on your source. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to turn it up as much as I can here, and I can see here's the output right there. I've got the output cranked up as much as I can. So I've got everything maxed volume-wise, but you want to do that first on your source as much as possible before trying to do it on the Akai. But now that I've done that, and it's still not loud enough, I'm going to turn up the knobs in the back. And let's see, let's start up this side here. Okay, that's good on that side. Let's go to the next side. Okay, that's not bad, that's not bad. Close enough, close enough. So you can see there, it's not going up in the crazy ranges where it's going ahead and peaking or anything, but it's still loud enough to get a good full sample out of it. And that's kind of what you want to do. You just kind of want to mess with the volumes in the back to be able to do that. Once we're all set there, we're not going to use this sampler part. We're going to hit this one right over here, which is the Autosampler. So on this one here, let's see. The first thing we see is the inputs 1 and 2, and that's definitely what we're using, so we're good to go with that. Where it says the note range, I'm going to pick C2 through C4. Now, of course, you can pick anything you want, whatever range you want. You double click here, and you can go back an octave, right? Pick whatever you want. In this case, I'm going to go with the C2 through C4 because I've already heard in my brain, in my sound, in my headsets, this is the range I'm going to play for this bass. So I'm good to go with that. C2 through C4, I'm good. And I'm probably going to do, like I said, a 4-note spread is usually pretty good for me. So I'm going to drop that down to 4 instead of 6. So it says extend min-max notes. So what it will do is all the other notes, like I'm doing C2. So what about from negative C2 to C2? What about those notes? Are they just going to be empty and blank? Well, you can do that by taking the check out of that. Or you can let the Akai Force sample those and essentially stretch a single sample, if you will, across and map it across all of the note ranges. And I'm okay with that in this situation because I don't plan on playing anything below C2. So it doesn't bother me if the sample is not really great fidelity because I'm not playing those notes anyways. Same thing for C4 on up to G8. I'm not really caring if the note fidelity is not really good and the modulation sucks. I don't really care about that because I'm not going to play above a C4. But I do want to have that there in my pocket in case for some weird reason I do go above or beyond at least 1 or 2 notes. I want to have that ability to do it. So I want the full range mapped out. So I'm going to keep that checked right there. Okay. Next, we're going to go down to velocity. This is really the coolest part of it. I'm not going to do it for this because I don't really need different velocity layers, but for something like a piano or for something like a string where you want to add some different, however hard you hit it, it will play whatever note. This is where you can set different layers, and because you've got it set up with MIDI, it's going to go ahead and apply the amount of pressure that's needed for that sample. Now, of course, it's going to double the amount of sample, or it's going to quadruple the amount of samples that you're going to be having, but it's going to really give it multiple layers to each pad that you're doing. So depending on how hard you want to hit it, if you want it to be velocity sensitive, you want to enable all of these layers here, or maybe just 2 of them, or what have you. Whatever your choice is. For me, I'm going to keep it just the same layer, same volume, no matter how hard I hit the pad, and we're going to keep it that way, okay? Next, come up here. How long are you going to hold the sample for? So if you're doing like a string or an organ or something that has a long drawn-out sustain to it, then play around with this. Usually what I'll do on a string instrument is I'll probably do like maybe an 8-second and say hold it for 8 seconds. And then I'll say, what's the release time? I'll say, give it about 2 seconds, maybe even 3 seconds of release time before you hit the next note. You're basically telling the Akai Force to hit all the notes that you normally would do by hand, and you're telling it how to do it. You're saying, hey, Akai, I want you to hit the C2 and hold it for 8 seconds, and then I want you to release it and wait. What do we got? 2 seconds? 1 second? Let's increase that to 2 seconds. There we go. So we'll say, wait 2 seconds, and then do the next sample. That way you don't get a lot of them bleeding into each other. Like if you know there's a pad sample, a string sample, that takes a while for it to finish, bring it down its sound. Then you want to make sure you listen to that accordingly and prepare before you do the auto sample and listen and say, well, how long do I have to hold the key down to get the full range sample? You know what I'm saying? And then how long does it take once I release my finger for it to completely deaden, to silence? And then change these accordingly. For my purposes, 3 second is fine. And then 2 second for release or whatever. You know what? Actually, I can bring that down about 1500 actually. So we'll bring it about 1500. Next, you want to go ahead and give it a name. So for my case, I'm just going to call it Dark FM bass. Okay. All right, next. Whoops. That's the only problem with this is the sliding. You end up hitting settings that you don't intend to hit. All right, so next is the looping. So in this case, I don't need a loop because it's just a bass. It's just to hit it and let it go. I don't need it to sustain. So I'm going to go ahead and move that to off. But I'll probably do another one where it's like an organ or something where it sustains, and then I'll show you something called an X fade, which is a pretty awesome way to do it. So it grays out some of the other options because you're not doing looping. Auto trim start, I usually just leave that as is, and it will make a track. So I'm just going to leave it as that so it doesn't make this the current track. And it's telling me it's going to take 27 seconds. So let's go ahead and hit do it, and hopefully my Bluetooth stays connected. All right, so you can hear it starting to play the samples, and you can see I'm not playing them. Now, normally I would have done that if I were just doing a regular sampler and not using the MIDI and not using the auto sample. It's me hitting all of these notes on the keyboard on the iPad and it recording it. So this is actually making it as a key group already for me. So it takes a lot of the pain away from making a key group, which is pretty awesome. And good. All right, so now we should be good to go. It's now sampled the entire bass line that I have. So to check out the key group that it's made, you go to menu, and you'll go to track edit, because now we're on a separate track. You'll notice here, I'm gonna go back to the matrix. You'll notice here right beside the MIDI, it made a new track called Dark FM, and it basically made a key group, because if you come here to menu and go to track edit, you'll notice it's the key group. And you'll notice that it gave me 7 key groups because I did C2 through C4, and I did a 4-note spread. Okay, so do the math, and you'll see that that's the case. So with the key groups, what I tend to do generally is, like if you see how it stops immediately, and I don't really want that. I kind of want a little bit of a, sustain to it. So the first thing I usually do is I go up here to the top, and I switch this to all, so it affects all of the notes in all of the key groups. And I go over here to envelopes, and what I'll do is I'll pick this last one here, okay, which is the release, right? And I'll usually crank that up, I don't know, it depends on the instrument, but I think probably 60 will do. Let's see what that sounds like. So it sounds good to me. It still releases quick, but it has just a little bit more than just a dead stop. So that's pretty awesome. So I'm digging that, and so I'm going to keep it that way for all key groups. So if you're not familiar with key groups, let's go to one here. We'll go to the first key group. If you look at the sample, you'll notice right here that it's made a sample, and he called it Dark FM bass, and then he called it whatever it was labeled as. And you can see the entire sample. Now, if you need to modify it or do anything different with the sample, you can do that with the sample edit or through here as well. And you'll also notice here, if you go back to global, what it did is it did the negative C2, so it says C minus 2. That confused me at first. I thought that meant C2, but that's not actually what it means. That means C negative 2. there's actually a C2, so no negative. So what it's doing is it's going from C -2 because I had done the auto extend note option. So it's actually done lower than C2, because if you look here, if I go to shift and hold note, you'll see that my range is C1. So right here is C1. You can hear how low and subby that sounds and why I choose not to play C1, but it's still recorded all the notes going up to it. C2 is the one that I actually started with. Okay, so then if I look back here and I'm touching the C2, let me bring this back up here. So you'll hear, so there's the C2. So if I hit it with my finger, whoops, I'm sorry. There we go. Let's try that again. Okay, so you'll hear the C2, and then here, that's the C2, right? So it did it properly, which I don't know why it doesn't do that normally from when I do sample edit, but regardless. So the C2 is where it actually starts going to C4, right? So it would be the last range. So if you go back here and you go, let's go back to our C2, you can see that it did everything up until E flat 2. So in this case being the D sharp 2 that I mentioned, D sharp and E flat are the same thing. So in this particular case, it's done the proper sample. Now, if I decided to go up 4 notes or so, you can see that it jumps to key group number 2. And it starts at, in this case here, you can see E2, right? E2 to G2. In this particular case, once I go to G2, then it will actually change to the next key group. Or I can just manually change the key group here, right? So then it starts at G sharp 2, goes to B2, and so on and so forth, all the way up to 7, which would be C4, because I told it C2 through C4 is what I'm going to record, but because I did extend the notes, you can see it goes all the way up to G8 from there, okay? So even though I'm at my C4, I can still get all the other notes, and they still sound pretty good. You know, they're not bad. But generally, I wouldn't do that if I was going to go up in higher ranges. So, but basically, I have my instrument. Sounds like a pretty cool bass line right there. And I can also add different effects to it too. So if I want to add some reverb to it or some delay to the instrument or whatever, I can do that. Generally, what I'll do is I'll bake that by doing it from the source itself. But when it comes to key groups, you can do any way you want. And there's all kinds of other different things that you can do with it here with the LFO. I'm not really that good at that sort of thing, so I just tend to go with whatever I've created on the source here and then do it that way, okay? So that's pretty much what you do to make a sample or a key group from the iPad using Bluetooth MIDI in this particular case to make a sweet dark FM bass. So to save what you've got, you make sure you have that selected, and you go to save. And then from here, you'll do save as a key group right there. Okay, so I'll say key group, and I'll call it Dark FM. I'm just going to put it here on the root of my hard drive. Click save, and we're good to go. So now, if I were to go ahead to new project, and I would make a new project, I can bring in the key group I have, and it should map everything, correctly. So if I go here to empty project, and I go up here to the plus, I'm going to say I want to bring in a key group. So I'm going to hit key group. Okay, and I'll hit load, go back to my hard drive, and in the root of it should be the Dark FM bass. Oops, I'm in the wrong place. Go back up, root. There it is. And you'll notice here as well, let me turn this down for a second. You'll notice as well, all the samples are in here. So wherever you save the key group is where it's going to save your samples. So in this particular case, I probably should have just put it into a different folder for better folder management, but it was just for demo, so no big deal. All right, so I'm going to go to the XPM, which is the key group, and I'm going to hit load. And there we go. So it didn't take too long to load because it's only, like I said, it's only got 7 key groups. If it's got more key groups, and if you decide to sample like all 128 keys, well, it'll take a while to come up. Also, one thing you got to make sure of is when you go to your menu, just be mindful up here on the top of your memory and CPU usage. In this case, what is it, 2%? So 2% memory, 6% CPU, that's not bad. But there are some key groups that I've made that are like 15 to 20% memory usage. And it's because it's, you know, a lot more samples. And it's also got X-Fade doing with it as well. So I'll probably do a video on that as well. How to do an X-Fade version of something. So an instrument with sustain. We'll probably do that for the next video. But for now, I think that will cover what we needed for this called a key group. So I hope you guys appreciated that and really dug the video. If you do, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit your notification bell. And don't forget to get a loop, a acidic loop. Peace out, players.